So the last thing I want to do is talk to you more about this idea of speaker presupposition. And there are two reasons for this. Firstly, because the view of speaker presupposition that Stolnicker gives in Assertion is actually simpler than what his final view on the topic is. So you saw in the piece on pragmatic presuppositions that he gives a slightly more complicated version of presupposition there. In fact, even in later work, it gets more complicated still. So I want to give you a sort of full picture of his views on this. But the other reason I want to think about it is because the final definition works in terms of this notion of common belief. And from next week onwards, when we start thinking about Lewis on coordination, this idea of common belief and other similar notions like common knowledge are going to become very important to how we think about coordination and how it's possible. So it's going to be useful to see that idea now. So what was the view of speaker presupposition in Assertion? Well, the view was that a speaker presupposes P, just in case they believe P, and they believe their audience believes it as well. Before we go even further, it's worth sort of getting clear again on why is that latter condition necessary? Why do we build into speaker presupposition that they also believe their audience believes it? Well, remember what this notion ultimately is going to be used for is to give a definition of common ground. That is, the idea that information is sort of public in a certain way. But if to presuppose it was just to believe it was true, that wouldn't give us the right results. It would say that certain things are common ground, when they don't intuitively seem to be things that we want to call common ground. So here's a very simple case to think about. So suppose that I've decided I'm going to give a surprise exam on Wednesday, and I tell each of you that there's going to be a surprise exam. But I also tell each of you that you're the only one I'm telling. So this is a situation where everybody believes there's going to be an exam on Friday. However, do we want to say it's a situation where it's common ground amongst you that there's going to be an exam on Friday? I think the answer is no, because if you were to say there's going to be an exam on Friday, you would think that you were informing your peers that that was what was going to happen. So it doesn't look like we take that to be common ground in this situation. But it would be common ground if presupposition was just to believe it. So that's one reason to think that presupposition has to be more complicated, because it would get the wrong results in that case. So Stolnicker, as you saw in the pragmatic presuppositions paper, gives a second, slightly more complicated definition of speaker presupposition. So there he says that a speaker presupposes P if they believe P, if they think their audience believes P, and they think that their audience believes that they believe P. So not only do I have to, suppose I'm talking to you, if I'm to presuppose P, I have to think, suppose that I presuppose it's raining. That means that I believe it's raining, I believe that you believe it's raining, but I also believe that you believe that I believe it's raining. Again, this should be reminiscent of the ideas from Strawson that were derived from Grice that we saw last week. So not only do I have to believe it and have to believe that you believe it, but I have to think that you think certain things about me in order to presuppose it on this view. So this includes the conditions from the earlier definition, but it adds this extra one that I believe, that you believe, that I believe it. And you might ask, well, why is that condition necessary? And it's simply because it looks like we can just get more complicated variations on the original surprise exam case that require something like this. So this is just going to be a more complicated version of the exam case from before. So again, there's going to be a surprise exam. Now I tell each person there's going to be an exam just like before, but I also tell them more this time than the last time. So in addition to telling them that there's going to be an exam, I told them that I've told each individual person that there's going to be an exam. But I also tell each person that I haven't told everybody that you know. In fact, I'm telling everybody else that you don't know there's going to be an exam. So what happens at the end of the situation? Well, everyone believes there's going to be an exam. Everybody believes that everybody believes that there's going to be an exam, but they think they're the only person that believes that everybody believes there's going to be an exam, because they think everybody else doesn't think that they know. So this is a kind of complicated situation, but ask yourselves, in a situation like that, does it seem like we want to say that it's common ground that there's going to be an exam? And I think you can get intuition that we want to say that the answer is no. Why might we want to say the answer is no? Well, imagine that you were thinking about whether to tell somebody or whether to assert that there's going to be an exam tomorrow. If you were to say that to somebody else, then in some sense you would be giving news to that person. In some sense it seems like you're saying something informative. Now, it's not because they didn't know there was going to be an exam. They knew that, and moreover, you know they know that, but they have mistaken thoughts about what you believe. So if you tell them that there's going to be an exam, that would be kind of surprising to them. They'll think, oh, I thought you didn't know that. In other words, it doesn't look like that's information that they would take for granted when they were talking to you. But of course, whether information is being taken for granted, that's exactly what we're trying to get at when we're giving the idea of common ground. So that's an argument for thinking that in this more complicated situation, it's still not common ground that there's going to be an exam because of the attitudes other people have towards you. So that's why there's this extra clause in Stalnaker's definition, because of this kind of more complicated case. But it turns out, and if you think about the examples hard enough, you'll see why, that you can maybe even get counterexamples to this more complicated condition. And so the final notion that Stalnaker ends up with is actually quite a complicated one. Again, it's worth mentioning now, even though it's something he talks about in later writing, because the idea it's built on is going to be one that's really useful for us going on. So to get at it, it's first helpful to think about this idea that we'll call mutual belief. And we'll just say that something is mutually believed in a conversation if every particular person believes it. So for instance, it's mutually believed to be raining if everyone in the conversation believes that it's raining. Now, to say that it's mutually believed is quite weak in some ways, because you can mutually believe something even if you think you're the only one that knows that. So this is what's going on in the very first situation that we saw, in the very first exam case. In that situation, mutually believed in the class that there's going to be an exam. And that falls well short of the sort of transparency that we're interested in. It's by no means common ground that there's going to be an exam, even though it's mutually believed. So this notion of mutual belief is kind of weak because all it says is just everybody believes that. So now notice our original example of mutual belief was about something like it's raining. But you can have mutual beliefs about what is mutually believed. So if I believe that everybody believes P, and moreover everybody else thinks that too, well then it's mutually believed that it's mutually believed that P. So you can have mutual beliefs about mutual beliefs. And if you look, the second definition that Stalnaker gives, the extra complicated condition, it's very close to one that's just stated in terms of mutual belief. So if you said that a speaker presupposes P, just in case they believe that it's mutually believed that P, that'd be pretty close to Stalnaker's second definition. So as you'll see in the handout, it's helpful to write something like MBP to represent that it's mutually believed that P. And once you write that, you can see why it's very natural to say something can be mutually believed to be mutually believed that P, because that's just MB, MBP. But of course, once you get into that mindset, you can just see that you can just go off to the races and just apply it indefinitely. So you can have things that are mutually believed to be mutually believed to be mutually believed, or mutually believed to be mutually believed to be mutually believed to be mutually believed, and so on. In theory, you have all these different levels of mutual belief depending on how many MB operators you apply to the original thing. So once you have all these different notions of being mutually believed to be mutually believed to be mutually believed, mutually believed to be mutually believed, very hard to say. You have all these different levels, and you can introduce finally a last, more complicated notion, which is just to be mutually believed at all levels. And we'll call this common belief. So we'll say that you commonly believe P. If P is mutually believed, it's mutually believed to be mutually believed, it's mutually believed to be mutually believed to be mutually believed, and so on. It is mutually believed at all levels. That's what we'll say the common belief is. And this is exactly the notion that Stalnaker uses in his final definition of speaker presupposition. On his very last definition of speaker presupposition, he says that a speaker presupposes P just in case they believe it's common belief. So he appeals to this notion of common belief that's defined in terms of mutual belief at all levels. Roughly, one kind of way of motivating this is to think that, well, no individual level is going to be sufficient because you can always get sort of more complicated versions of the exam case that we came up with. I'll let you think for yourselves through how convinced you are by that argument that we want common belief. But the important thing to take from all this discussion is, one, that the feeling of whether something is public or not has something to do with not only mutual beliefs, but different levels of mutual beliefs. And maybe the key to capturing the transparency in just full generality, to account for all the possible variations on this exam case, is to just say that something is commonly believed at all levels.